Hello, and welcome to Catholicism Isn't Scary. I'm your host, Jana. I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, became a Protestant as an adult for just under 2 years, and I'm now Catholic. In this podcast, we explore theology and history and find out why Catholicism isn't scary. This week's episode is called The Protestant Gatorade Dilemma. What do I mean by that? Well, I've heard a lot of strange things about communion from Protestants lately. One pastor told me that any kind of fruit or veggie growing on a vine was an acceptable replacement in communion. He said he liked to use watermelon juice. I also recently spoke to a Protestant woman working at a church who said that because communion was simply a symbol, water could be used instead of wine. She even agreed that Gatorade would be an acceptable replacement and that rice or pasta could theoretically substitute for bread. It's a far cry from even the Jehovah's Witnesses organization that I grew up in, where the pattern Jesus set with wine and unleavened bread was absolutely mandatory. Entering into Protestantism really surprised me. Their wishy-washy stances on what could actually be used did not sit well with me. Now, to be fair, I don't think most Protestants are actually using Gatorade in their communion services, and I think many Protestants would draw their line at grape juice. But I would like to ask Protestants to consider this question. Why do you use juice at all? I doubt the average Protestant has given this a lot of time and thought, but the answer to this is actually found in tradition, a man-made tradition that developed in the 19th century. A Methodist man named Thomas Welch felt convicted to completely abstain from alcohol. He wasn't alone. He was part of a bigger movement called the temperance movement, which saw any alcohol consumption as sinful and supported a total prohibition on alcohol. This actually motivated Welch to develop a way to prevent grape juice from fermenting through pasteurization. And if the name Welch is starting to sound familiar, you're right. He is the one and the same Welch that the name Welch's grape juice comes from. But this temperance movement's theological reasoning went farther than just alcohol simply being a sin. Their claim was actually also that fruit of the vine could not have ever meant that Jesus used wine at the Last Supper. Any fermentation in alcohol would have been a corruption, and since Jesus was sinless, it would have not been what he used. Their interpretation was that it was simply always grape juice. Remember the wedding at Cana? Oh yes, we all remember when the master of the banquet said, "You have saved the best non-alcoholic grape juice until now." Of course, to have any real wine, according to the temperance movement, was to drink from the cup of devils. In any case, Thomas Welch's son was actually the man most responsible for spreading this grape juice usage. Charles Welch launched ad campaigns that focused on the so-called purity that this juice offered. Some of their slogans included, "If your druggist hasn't the kind that was used in Galilee containing not one particle of alcohol, write us for a price." Which is again clearly insinuating that the only wine ever being used by Christ was just plain juice. Or this slogan, which I kind of found funny, "The lips that touch Welch's are the only ones that touch mine." By 1916, the largest Protestant denominations were signed up to use grape juice only, and it spread from there. I mean, now it's the most common way to find communion being done in most Baptist, evangelical, Pentecostal, non-denominational, the list goes on, groups of Protestants. Despite the temperance movement wearing out in the 1930s and most denominations changing their tune to say that moderate alcohol consumption was fine after all, the grape juice simply stuck around. If you ask a Protestant today why they use grape juice, they're most likely going to tell you it's because it's easier. Or it's the same symbolism as wine and there's no temptation for alcoholics in it. But that's not the real reason they use the juice. Like I said, it's because it's simply a tradition they've inherited and they've never actually thought about it. Most would acknowledge that Christ did indeed use wine at the wedding in Cana and at the Last Supper, and most would not try to say it was just juice like their temperance movement forefathers. But at the same time, and ironically for sola scriptura insisting folks, they surely don't see it as important to use wine like what is demonstrated by Christ himself in Scripture. In the conversations I've had with many, they simply seem to shrug their shoulders at that. Sure, maybe the only thing used for communion mentioned in the Bible was wine, but who cares? At least we're doing it. At least we're remembering. That seems to be the prevalent attitude. And this sort of nonchalant attitude to communion has logically led to what I call the Gatorade dilemma. I mean, Gatorade is still a liquid. You can get it in a purple or red color. In many Protestants' interpretive understanding, it's just the simple act of drinking anything and remembering Jesus that would constitute communion with him. That's why I've had multiple people tell me that using water in replacement of juice is fine. I mean, they're staying logically consistent, and it leads them to say that technically you could sip anything, bite into anything you have on hand, and just remember Jesus, and there you go, you've done communion. But the problem is much deeper than many seem to realize. Having water alone for communion is actually an ancient heresy that was done by the Aquarians, aka the water presenters. Both St. Cyprian and John Chrysostom write about it and condemn it, and it was officially condemned by the church in the late 300s. Further, the Last Supper was a Passover meal. Wine was and still is a major part of any Seder ritual. And the wine represents Christ's blood. It also represents the joy we will experience, a symbolism of the wedding of Christ and his bride, the church. The wedding at Cana foreshadowed this. To say otherwise and that whatever you want to use in place of wine is theologically dangerous for so many reasons that I'm not going to get into. But it just seems like this sort of dangerous theology is alive and well all throughout the Protestant landscape. And while I'm sure that most are not, like I said, using water or Gatorade in their communion services, the fact remains that plenty of them think it is fine to do if they were in a pinch. They do not have a sense of anything being invalid here. And unfortunately, most of them have no idea how they got here in the first place. That's the show for today, folks. Come back again and we'll continue to talk about why Catholicism isn't scary. Check out my YouTube page. I have lots of videos of conversations with pastors, people working at churches, and you can hear these sorts of conversations for yourself. You can hear what they have to say about communion and all different kinds of other things as well. So check it out. Like and subscribe, please. Thank you.